Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to reintroduce to you now. Michelle Hurn is a returning guest on our show. Be sure to check out her first appearances on our podcast on episodes 80 and 150 of Boundless Body Radio. Michelle Hurn is a registered dietitian with over a decade of experience as a clinical acute care dietitian, a lead dietitian in psychiatric care, and as an outpatient dietitian. While practicing inpatient and outpatient care in the hospital setting, Michelle discovered a disheartening connection between the high carbohydrate, low fat, quote unquote, sugar moderation nutrition guidelines she was required to teach and the rapidly declining health of her patients. Michelle is the author of the book, The Dietitian's Dilemma. What would you do if your health was restored by doing the opposite of everything you were taught? Detailing how the current nutrition guidelines came into existence and advocating for a low carbohydrate, animal-based way of eating as an option for individuals struggling with diabetes, mental disorders, eating disorders, sarcopenia, and heart disease. As an endurance athlete, she discovered the benefits of low carbohydrate eating as well and won her first ultra marathon in 2020, covering 44.63 miles in a 6-hour time frame. Wow, Michelle Hurn, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you back to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me back.
It's such an honor to have you. We've had a great chat about you and your history with eating disorders and how, like you wrote about your book. I love your book, how you wrote, like, what would you do? What would you do if you were in my space? You were taught a certain way, and that way ended up being dead wrong. You said, like, restoring your health by doing the exact opposite. We got to talk about that. We also got to talk about a low carbohydrate study, quote unquote, study that came out that was absolute garbage. We did a really great job debunking that. I really appreciated your scientific mind as far as that goes. And back in the first episode, we actually learned that you and I had met through both of our companies that we were working for at the time. It's so funny to look back on pictures. It's understandable that I didn't really recognize you because you look so different than you did about a decade ago.
Isn't that wild? I hope I hope I keep looking a little younger. You know, I'm not eating massive amounts of carbohydrates anymore.
You look younger now than you did then. That happens to everybody in this community. And you can just see the inflammation and the puffiness is just absolutely like gone now, where it was very, very apparent before.
I can tell. Yep. I believe you.
Well, that's awesome. Well, as of the day of this recording, you just had a race this weekend. There's always something that comes up as when I'm, doing a race myself or I'm coaching people. I try to prepare them, like maybe their last long run. I take away their iPad or their iPod, excuse me, so they're not listening to music, or maybe you get your bottles wrong or something. But yeah, you just had a race this last weekend and something kind of went wrong.
It did. So I was doing the Tunnel Hill 50 mile. So it's out in Vienna, Illinois. So what you do, Vienna is a super duper small town. There's nowhere to stay in the city. So everybody stays it's about 25 miles outside of the city in kind of a neighboring city called Marion. And so, you're ready, got all my fuel, got everything going, go to the rental car and it doesn't start. And we've got about an hour and 10 minutes till the race starts. And unfortunately, like, it's turning over, the lights are coming on. So, my intuition is it's not the battery, but still, we grabbed someone from the hotel, tried to jump it. It's not starting. My wife is on the phone with Hertz. I'm looking at Uber. And because it's just kind of a small area, both Uber and Lyft could get me to the race. But I was going to be about half an hour after the start. And, and yeah, but this will renew your faith in humanity. I sometimes get discouraged with our healthcare system and many things, but it's 5:45 in the morning. I'm going around to the few people that are in the hotel that are just up, and there was a woman sitting there drinking coffee. And I said, I need help. Can you please drive me to this race? My car won't start. And God bless this woman. She was like, all right, let me go get my sister. And so she drove Corinne and my wife and I, 25 miles, and she wouldn't give us or let me give her cash or Venmo. So Kelly she said she was from Tennessee with the yellow sweatshirt. I never saw her again. I might never, but my heart is with you. Thank you so much. We got to the starting line about 10 minutes before. So I did make the start. Goodness. And, I didn't know if my wife was going to be able to meet me at the aid stations or what. And you kind of get your fuel ready as you're going. I had nothing because the plan was to get there with plenty of time. Right. But no, people were amazing. The people that were watching the race drove Corinne to the aid stations that they were going to. And then a wonderful couple drove us back to our hotel. And yeah, and then, we had to get the rental car towed 2 hours, and it was an experience. You always think after running a race, like, you just can't wait to get a shower and chill. And, we didn't end up getting back to our hotel until almost midnight.
Oh my goodness.
Finished the race around 2 p.m. But, I'm beyond grateful. It was a fantastic overall experience. And, just like life, it's not always going to go how you think it is. So you just got to pivot, pray, and kind of roll with it.
That's amazing. So cool. Thank you, Kelly in Tennessee. We know you're a regular listener of Boundless Body Radio. So thanks for tuning in and thanks for helping out with our other guests. I love it. Okay, so on that note, I want to review your story. It's been a while since you've been on the show, and I definitely want to hear your personal story. Before we do that, though, let's stay on this topic of endurance sport. Like, tell us what it was like to first transition over to a low carbohydrate diet and why that benefited your endurance by so much.
Yeah. So, in 2019, I was trying to qualify for the Olympic trials in the marathon. I was following a traditional, very high carbohydrate, low fat, lower protein diet, probably eating about 400 carbohydrates a day. And, my body just all of a sudden stopped recovering. Like, I was getting dizzy and shaky and sweaty. I've had anxiety pretty much my entire life, but it went from, kind of bad to paralyzing. I was having to call out of work. And, I've talked about this before, kind of had that come to Jesus moment where, got home from work, woke up, fell asleep on the couch, woke up and just felt like my body was on fire. And that's when, 2 a.m, I drove to 7-Eleven, got 30 pounds of ice and was sitting in an ice bath. And so at the age of 36, I basically said, I'm done running. This is ridiculous. I'm not qualifying for any trials. I tried everything, I had tried all kinds of, when I was struggling, I reached out to sports dietitians and doctors, and they all told me I needed to eat more carbohydrates. And, I was prescribed lots of anti-anxiety medications. And so, but this is another thing you and I talked about, I think on the last podcast or the one before, that, when things are going really bad in your life, like, you may not know it, but that sitting in the ice bath at 3 a.m, crying, having my wife come in and be like, maybe we should do something different. I had no idea that would be such a pivotal turning point in my life. That's when I said, I'm done running. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm 36. I'm old. I'm tired. And I just figured, well, if I'm not running, why not try a low carb diet? Because I intuitively knew they just weren't making me feel well, but I had been told my entire dietetic career. And even from when I was, very sick and in the hospital with an eating disorder, you have to have carbohydrates. They're the foundation of human nutrition. You won't have energy. You won't run. You won't heal without them. So, embracing the low carbohydrate diet was pretty scary. And, I didn't know what I know now. I've shared before that if you're going to do that, make sure you do some research. I didn't use electrolytes or anything. I would have much benefited. You can get some pretty gnarly headaches without that. But yeah, my whole world changed, within weeks. My lifelong anxiety, was 90% better. I was calm. I could, for the first time in my life, go hours without eating. I was one of those people that if you didn't eat every 2 to 3 hours, hangry, dizzy, shaky. I was thinking clearly. I could sleep better. I felt nourished. And of course, because I felt so good, that led me to ask the question, why? I also shared, I believe on the last podcast, that my wife, at 3 weeks into this, my wife said, this is the best your anxiety has been in the 11 years that I've known you. So wow. She's a scientist, she's smart, so what is going on? And so both of us spent the next several months just digging through scholarly articles. We were both working at hospitals at the time. So we both you tend to have access to anything, a lot of times you can get stuff. Anybody can get some articles on Google Scholar, but a lot of the, I don't know if we're right, where it is more prestigious, but a lot of articles are limited unless you have access through an institution. And there was article after article after article on low carbohydrate nutrition and how it could reverse diabetes in weeks. I had patients that were diabetic for 30 years, and not just epilepsy, seeing changes in mental health. Now we have with Alzheimer's, people being able to have function, and it blew my mind. But and again, I kind of got off topic, but as far as endurance training for me, fast forward, I obviously felt so good. I started running again, but I actually used the low carbohydrate diet to leverage, because your body, it doesn't matter if you're high carbohydrate, low carbohydrate, whatever, you want to defend muscle glycogen. You don't hit the wall in a marathon or a long race because you run out of stored body fat. And we have lots of that, even super duper lean people. you run out of stored muscle glycogen. So by following a low carbohydrate diet, I was able to train my body to burn fat for fuel at faster paces. Because normally once your heart rate is higher, once you're running faster, you're really relying heavily on your muscle and liver glycogen. But you can flip that. You can change those ratios. You can actually burn more fat for fuel when you're becoming fat adapted. And so, I went from, as you read my introduction, which I appreciate so much, I couldn't run 2 to 3 miles anymore. I was so sick. To in 2020, I was able to run 6 hours. And then, since then I've run several other races. Just 2 days ago, I did a 50 miler. And it was my fastest 50 miler. So I was pretty excited. I definitely will. I did not have enough electrolytes. I'm kind of bummed. I was rolling until about mile 40. Got a little bit of cramps, legs seized up, until I got to the next aid station where I literally just ate a handful of salt. Lesson learned. I've had about 12 people in the low carb community reach out and say, "Didn't you bring electrolyte tabs?" No, I didn't. I will now. Anyone else needs to email me that. I got it. I don't. No, it's fine. I appreciate all the feedback. Yeah. So it's really made my life beautiful. I don't feel restricted. I don't feel deprived. People say, "Oh, this way of eating is so restrictive." But I do eat carbohydrates. I utilize them strategically. But yeah, my life is great. And as an endurance athlete, my recovery is better. My inflammation is better. My energy is better. My sleep is way better. I used to really struggle, waking up a lot, not feeling well, on a low or not much higher carbohydrate diet. So yeah, for me, it's been a really, really powerful and helpful tool.
Would you ever go back?
One thing I've learned is I don't never say never, but I am 99.9% sure unless something drastically crazy changed. No, I can't, honestly, I can't imagine myself ever going back to that way of eating, because even eating carbohydrates, even having to utilize them, I don't like how I feel necessarily, right? Obviously for race day or even kind of leading up to that, as my volume decreases, I'm going to be eating a higher percentage of carbs than normal, but it's just ugh, I just kind of feel icky. It's not my jam for sure.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it, is icky. I think back on my cycling races when I was racing a lot, and you're drinking all the Cytomax and the goos, and as a team, if we were doing a 3 or 4 hour ride, we would have to stop at gas stations, just pound those cookies, that they sell there, because that's literally the only way that you can get through a ride that long if your body's burning glycogen. And that's what blew my mind when I was using metabolic carts to help assess how people were burning those two fuel sources, fat and carbohydrates. We knew that you could change the training and maybe add in more lower intensity kind of zone 2 training, and that would bump up your fat burning a little bit. But when you change the diet, then you really see vast differences on how well we can burn fat and again save that glycogen, so we're not running out. You just can't store very much of it. So yeah, I would never go back to think about mountain biking for a few hours or going out on a road bike or anything. I don't think about food. It's just not that much of a thing anymore. It sounds like it's the same for you.
Oh, absolutely. And the change can happen relatively quickly. We have some pretty good metabolic data that people on a very high carbohydrate diet, say even in zone 3, especially in zone 4, if they're running at a higher intensity, they're burning up to 90% carbohydrate. And then when they go on a low carbohydrate diet for 90 days, so 3 months, you can almost completely flip that. You're not necessarily burning 90%, but it's closer to 70% fat. It's fantastic. And of course, there is that transition period where you just feel like you're, running in quicksand. But, if you can kind of get through that, it's in my opinion really the best way to eat. You not only feel better, your energy is better throughout the day. For myself, my mental health is significantly better. Yeah, overall it's a really good way to be.
That's awesome. I love that. And you describe it so perfectly, where there is a transition period around races. You can have a little bit more. This is called periodization. And any endurance athlete knows that there's periodization in a year. You can't be at your highest, best peak level all year. You're going to fade at some point. So you plan strategically, so show where your A races and B races are. And you plan accordingly to hit peaks at certain times. Well, with nutrition, it's exactly the same. It's not like you have to be zero carbohydrate for the entire year. You want to do that in a certain part of the year where your volume and intensity is really low, and then you can start to add back in. Those two things go together really, really well.
Yeah, I found that the lower my intensity is, the better I am for staying pretty low carbohydrate. Even higher volume, I'm able to stay relatively low carb. It's when you're getting really high volume, and then certainly when you have intensity, adding more carbohydrates back in. But like you said, it's periodization, and it's funny because when I say more carbohydrates, we're talking going maybe from 50 grams to 150 grams versus, obviously the pre-Michelle Hurn, when I was an endurance athlete, at one point I was over 500 grams of carbohydrates a day.
That's
So
crazy.
you can imagine just how sick. Oh, and an interesting side note, my wife said, she was obviously at the aid station, so she was watching the race. And there's also a study on this, is a lot of endurance athletes will drop out of a race, not because of injury or because of, other issues. It'll be because of GI issues, stomach. My wife said one guy literally came through with just crap all the way down his legs. Poor guy. His wife standing there trying to help him change shorts. And that's awful, and that's one thing I've had a lot less issues with, GI wise, since I've been lower carbohydrate.
Yeah, totally. So many other benefits. And you and I think have a similar experience and a good motivator to keep us on. Like all of those things are amazing. But it really is the mental health, the anxiety. Like a few weeks on carnivore, and the anxiety that I didn't know I had is replaced by this like stillness and calmness, and like nothing was wrong. Like everything was fine. That's a good enough motivator to keep me off of sugar and that type of food, because that comes right back for me and I hate it.
Yeah, it is interesting that, I certainly wasn't taught as a dietitian just how crucial, having the vitamins and minerals for your brain, to synapse correctly, and having that blood sugar stability for your brain to work efficiently. And if you're not getting enough of, the zinc, the B12, the folate, your brain doesn't work well. And in our standard American diet, we're eating a lot of these fortified foods like cereals and breads, but they're not well absorbed. We're eating very low protein foods, those are the ideal foods to help build neurotransmitters. And we're constantly spiking and crashing our blood sugar. You feel great, you feel terrible, you feel great. Just think about how most people eat, cereals and sandwiches and granola bars. So by eating in a way that really keeps your blood sugar stable, not only you feel well, your brain is functioning, and you're just able to handle life appropriately. And I don't know about you, but the older I get, the more I'm seeing, and it's sad, even young people just crumbling with life. Life is stress. You're going to have breakups. You're going to have your car break down. You're going to have, you name it. Just when you think you got your shit together, the dog eats a stick or something. And as humans, we need to be able to, you can be upset and obviously process emotions, but just to be able to handle life. And I feel like I'm seeing more and more people just, like I said, crumble when things get challenging.
Yeah. Yeah, you just, when you're in that other state of mind, you forget to slow down, and like you've got options. When something doesn't go wrong, you can stop for a second and go like, okay, well, this happened, so maybe I could do this, or actually I could do that too. Like you have the ability to chill out, see things really objectively, and make a decision and act on it, where before it feels like a crisis and there's like no options. It's just like terrible, this is falling apart, and that's all you can even do with it anyway.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't necessarily know that I ever would have stopped and stepped back and thought about that. But certainly before going low carb, I was much more reactionary, meaning something would happen and it'd be like, I got to fix it right away, or I got to do this, and a lot of times it was probably not the best way to handle the situation. And maybe even saying certain things, or maybe less than ideal responses. So I feel like now I'm better, like you said so eloquently, just better able to kind of assess the situation. Like even the race thing, I feel like before I would have just lost my mind. I would have been in a corner crying, oh my God, I'm going to miss the race. So instead it's like, all right, what are our options? We're either going to be half an hour late from Uber. We can do that. Let's go door to door, and see if anyone will take us. And, one thing I definitely learned too is the sun will always come up tomorrow. Life will be okay. I just have to keep going and be as brave as I possibly can.
And bum rides from Kelly in Tennessee.
Yes, Kelly in Tennessee. Shout out to her. I will always be grateful. She will always, when I start to get down on humanity, I will remind myself there's wonderful humans out there.
They're out there. I love that.
Yes.
That's amazing. With my personal story, I remember somebody sent me an interview that Nina Teicholz did when her book came out, when it was really popular, 2014. I noticed from my Facebook memories recently, a few weeks ago, that I actually didn't start reading the book until 2016. And what I've realized is I think I was introduced to the concept and I understood that endurance athletes could eat fat, but what I was especially when I look back and I see like why did it take me so long to pick up that book? For me, it was resistance. I knew for myself that like if this woman's right, she might be right. If she is right, everything I know about nutrition is wrong. Take me back to like what that time was like in your life when you've been trained a certain way. You're pulling up these studies. There's no small amount of these studies. There's a lot of studies that have been done for over 100 years talking about this stuff. Like, are you just all the feels at this time?
Yeah, initially, potentially even naively, well, first I was angry, but then I was super excited and empowered. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to print these out. And I was working as a clinical dietitian in acute care at the time. And I was like, I'm going to change the way we treat our patients. This is amazing. Everyone will be so excited. And of course, my boss and clinical director, and even I went to the head medical chief officer, and they all just said, nope, we're not doing that. It's not the guidelines. We don't have time for it. They said it a little bit more, what's the right word? Maybe eloquently, trying to bullshit you like we care about what you're saying. Yeah. So yeah, I really had a personal kind of crisis because I was like, I don't think I can ethically continue to practice because I know what I'm teaching people, not just like, oh, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. No, I know now that it's harmful. And I mean, that's an oath that we all take. Every medical professional is do no wrong. We can't go into something knowing that we're causing harm. And I felt like that's what I was doing, and I expressed these concerns to anyone who would listen. And I remember, when I made the decision I was going to leave the hospital setting at that time, one of my co-dietitians pulled me aside and said, hey, don't do this. And I said, don't do what? She said, because I had said to you, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to step away. She said, even if you're right, you'll never get hired again. You're not going to make any money. You're going to lose all credibility. And she wasn't totally wrong. Financially, tell you, you make a lot more in healthcare than you did, trying to sell books. But yeah, there were a lot of tears. There was a lot of, what do I do? What am I going to do now? Because obviously, it's not cheap to become a dietitian. You have to get your 4-year degree. I had an internship, and I took out student loans. So yeah, it was really hard, but I was fortunate. I stayed in the system until I was able to step away and kind of hustled for a while. I've had several different jobs and gigs, and I'm very grateful that Dietitian's Dilemma has sold well, although Amazon, I think, makes more of my book than I do, but I'm grateful to be able to get the word out there. And, now I do some contract work actually for facilities looking for some help, with their menus, specifically gearing them more towards low carbohydrate nutrition.
That's amazing. I just think there's so much power in the universe that goes to the people that stand by their values, regardless of the outcome. And yeah, like you're taking a huge leap of faith by doing that, but you get rewarded by certain things and different doors open that weren't open previously. And so tough times for sure. And it must have been very, very scary to come out and do that. And again, I just absolutely love your book. What would you do? What would you do? Like for me as a nutrition coach, like, I spent the better part of several months reading a 600-page book and passed my test, and I am a nutrition coach. That's not the same as what you're describing as far as a dietitian. You guys have way more school. All the bills that you said you had to pay from schooling, like those stakes are much, much higher than anything I had to face. And so the courage that it would have taken to leave that setting and write the book, I just think is massive.
I really appreciate that. And, I totally understand and value that. And I also appreciate, I'm super fortunate to have a partner that also had a really good, she has a great job. So that helped, to be like, okay, we can, until you figure out what you're going to do next, we have a little bit of a bridge here. But I do have dietitians that reach out to me all the time that say, I don't know what to do. Like I'm the primary, breadwinner, we get insurance through me. But I really appreciate what you said, because it's true that when you put yourself out there, doors will open. And maybe there's people listening that if you're not in a position where you can like step away from your job or leave your job, you can just start though. You can start maybe advocating on social media, starting a YouTube, starting something just to kind of like, get your voice and get your word out there and see if you can't build off that to a point to where you can, eventually transition out of whatever you're doing.
I love that. That's great advice. And this is perfect timing to plug your social media and your wife at the same time. You guys do the best videos. I almost just put it in the introduction, like go follow her on Instagram because the videos they make are absolutely amazing. Your wife is hilarious. I would say she wasn't the most comfortable on a lot of the videos when you first started putting them out, but she just gets like more and more comfortable and funnier every single time. Like, tell us about these videos you guys make. They're so cool.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You want to hear a quick funny story is, when writing the second book, I have one of my friends is going to help me promote it. And she's able to see what the number one thing people Google what do people Google when they Google Michelle Hurn? And I thought, oh, surely they Google like eating disorder recovery or endurance athlete or dietitian. Nope, they Google Michelle Hurn wife. Who's her wife? They think she's funny and gorgeous, and she is. So what we do is we're basically trying to do kind of like a satire. We're trying to show big issues, but we're having Corinne as my wife be the consumer, and I'm the traditional dietitian. So she'll ask like simple questions like, wow, shouldn't I not have this because it's going to cause my blood sugar to go off, and I'll be like, no, of course not, So we usually have to do several takes because we end up laughing or a dog starts barking or something crazy happens, but we like making fun of traditional dietitians. We do get a lot of we get a lot of positive. Most are pretty positive. Most people think it's pretty funny, but some traditional dietitians get very offended when we make fun of them, which they should.
Yeah.
I always tell them like, I'll let the manager know.
It's fantastic.
But it's the goal is people learn, we learn, we get inspired, we change our behavior through stories, right? Through listening, through watching, through understanding. And when you see something kind of acted out in a funny way, our number one watch video is that oat milk, how we make fun of oat milk. That's what will get people's attention. Because I could certainly stand up there and say like sugar is bad. But when you do it in kind of a funny skit and you bring in your personal experience and people can relate, that's what I found tends to get traction and tends to be very relatable.
Yeah, it certainly is that. You're definitely accomplishing that mission. And on a more serious note, like people have it really, really hard out there. Like it is not easy. I look at even my clients that I train on a day-to-day basis and they know what I do. And very few of them can really like stick with it in the way that they kind of want to be able to get to their goals. The messages from the food companies, from the industry are so insidious. Like even just the other day, the vending machines still have the sticker that says balance what you eat, drink, and do. And we talk about moderation and a little bit of this is fine. And plant-based is great because we all think you're going to be eating tons of salads, but you're not. You're going to be eating corn and soy and stuff that's terrible for you. Fried food is everywhere. Seed oils are terrible. Like it's so rough. People have it really tough out there.
Yeah, there's so many layers to what you said. And I often just take a step back and I'm just like, I don't know how we're going to do it as a society because it has become, you have to really be so willing to be different to be a healthy human. And we know statistically, I think it's 93% of people now are metabolically unhealthy. And they measure that by body weight, by your, do you have high blood pressure, high blood sugar, several factors. And I mean, I'm not, this isn't earth shattering. You can just go to your local grocery store. I mean, it's amazing growing up, I don't remember seeing so many obese humans. This is not to shame people. This is just to say that unfortunately our health messages are terrible and our nutrition we're providing is terrible. So yeah, it is really hard. You literally can't go anywhere. Like I was there just waking up trying to read the news. There's going to be an ad for something sugary pop up on your phone. And then we have, traditional, like you said, dietitians saying everything in moderation. We have people saying sugar addiction or processed food addiction doesn't exist. We shame the patient instead of, calling out the terrible guidelines and advice. So it is rough. And at the same time, you have it's severe inflation going on. I don't know what gas is down where you are, but it's almost $5 a gallon here. Food prices are skyrocketing. So you have, more stress. And then just the amount of access we have to these foods that are just not good for our health it's never been higher, actually. We have more access than we've ever had at any time in history.
Yeah, we really have. And the good news to all of that, like you said, is that, yes, things might be getting more expensive. Gas prices might be higher. Food costs might be higher. Everybody talked about eggs last year and eggs getting really expensive. And it's like, even then, when eggs were at their most expensive, I could still get 2 dozen at Costco for $7.50. And like, yeah, that's more expensive than it was, but that's not cost prohibitive. You can still buy a pound of ground beef for, $4, $5. You can shop on sale. Like there's ways to do this. And once you do, if you can get used to enjoying a few simple things. Like for me, like steak and eggs, I can do that pretty much every day and I don't really ever get sick of it. And then you start to not really miss all the other stuff. It does get easier over time. It's can be convenient, can be inexpensive. Like people can do this. If you want it bad enough, if your life sucks bad enough on the carbohydrates, you can try it. And you'll find over time that it's really not prohibitive at all.
Absolutely. And, Karina and I say, we actually spend less now, even, how expensive food is now than it was like 4 or 5 years ago, just because we're not buying so much like produce and sugars and cereals and all the extras, and like we actually buy, when we get our beef, we get like, a fourth to a half a cow at a time. So that makes, you get all kinds of cuts, and that makes the price down to, $6 a pound. And that's everything from ground beef to ribeyes to all kinds of stuff. So yeah, and there's nothing more expensive. I tell people this than healthcare, your health expenses. If you certainly, even with insurance, a visit to the hospital, certainly the ICU will be thousands of dollars. Without insurance, it will be tens of thousands of dollars. So that's a lot of ground beef.
Yeah.
And your life can be very different. And you do have to be disciplined, and you do have to, really go for it and get into it. But within a month, within 30 days, your life can be totally different. And so, yeah, I'm just excited and full of joy. And, it makes you excited for life. Like I felt like when I was eating that higher carbohydrate diet and working and running, I just felt like I was standing on the sideline of my own life for so much of it, because I was always hungry. I was always anxious. I was always kind of like high strung. And now I get to just relax and be in the moment and chase my passion and, help other people. And ultimately, I really think that that's really what most humans want. If you ask people, and I've, working in the hospital for so many years, I worked in oncology, most people, especially when they're passing, they express fond memories of spending time with people, or they say, oh, I wish I'd spent more time with so-and-so, or God, I really wanted to be an artist. I wish I'd just done that. So my human experience is most of us don't want more material shit. We want to spend time with the people we care about, and we want to chase what's important to us.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a good point. I love that. I see that a lot in your work. You're always doing something. You've got your second book, which we're going to be talking about. You also participated in a study earlier this year, and I was not aware of this until I was about an hour into the episode with Valerie Ann. We were talking, and she talked a lot about her struggle with eating disorder, which was very hard to listen to. It was hard to listen to yours, very hard to listen to hers, with the cutting and self-abuse and the voices that she would experience in her head. And hearing her recovery from that was quite the story, but I didn't realize that she was involved in the case study that you had been a part of. So before we cover that, can you, I don't know if you even really want to, but you've done it in the past. So can you talk a little bit about your own personal history with an eating disorder?
Yeah, of course. So, I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa when I was 12. I was 5 feet tall, almost 5, like 4'11" and a half, and 57 and a half pounds. So I, it was pretty terrible. I go into detail in the book, but unfortunately my mom had some psychological struggles. So she was pretty absent. My father was doing the best he could. He was working all the time. I have 3 older sisters, and as an adult, it was hard for me to be like, wow, how did you guys miss, me losing so much weight? But, life was different, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when I was a kid. We didn't have cameras and camera phones and all this stuff. And, I hid it pretty well. And I was by myself a lot. I didn't, I had pushed everyone away who cared. And it really wasn't until I passed out in school and woke up in the hospital that, my parents really noticed and saw just how thin I was, and I had like bruises all over me, but it was just from sitting because I was so thin, and, ended up in treatment, was immediately put on the 24-hour tube feeding system, given a very, grim recovery. The doctor told my parents I had about a 10% chance to survive, which was, pretty terrifying to hear as a 12-year-old. I wasn't supposed to hear that. He took my parents into another room, and I was told to stay there, but I went and, tried to listen, because I'm 12 and you don't do what you're supposed to. And I was a mess. I was put on 7 different medications for depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, everything, you name it. And, all kinds of GI issues. Not only was I eating the standard American diet, the 24-hour tube feeding ingredients for corn syrup, soy protein, canola oil, and maltodextrin.
Great.
And yeah, it was, and I was told, like, once I started to become weight restored, that like, hey, this is your new lot in life. Like, you'll never recover. Like, nobody with an eating disorder ever really gets better. You're going to deal with racing thoughts. You'll probably relapse. You just have to do the best you can with this. So yeah, it was pretty terrible.
Yeah. And it's just, it's the same question I asked her. I've asked you this before. Like, if you go to a low carbohydrate diet, you are talking about restriction. You are literally restricting an entire, macronutrient essentially, and focusing on other ones. But I see it over and over and over. People that struggle with that over time end up in this area doing carnivore, doing, animal based, whatever you want to call it. And they realize that there's no restriction. You can eat as much as you like. It's just eating the right foods or eating the things that are food. You know what I mean? Like, so much of what we eat is not food. So how do you respond when people say that people with a history of an eating disorder shouldn't be restricted in any way in their diet?
I would say I agree. We shouldn't be restricting foods, but then we need to define what's food. And then we also need to stop looking at eating disorders as a psychiatric illness, and we need to be looking at them as a metabolic psychiatric illness, meaning we need to be shifting how we eat. And so first of all, let's define food. I don't believe that cookies, crackers, cereal, processed sugar, flours, and oils are ideal for human consumption. So I don't restrict at all. First of all, I don't feel like I'm restricted at all. Like, having your life back. Oh my gosh. If you had told me this when I was 12, hey, we have to cut off your right arm, but this is how you feel, I would have happily done that, right? You feel so much better. But let's talk about what that means when I say like a psychiatric metabolic illness. I mean, eating disorders are purely treated as a psychiatric illness. Like, hey, you're afraid of food, so we're going to make you eat all foods. We're going to give you tons of medication, give you therapy, and you're going to be fine. Well, there's a reason that eating disorders have by far the highest relapse rate of any psychiatric disorder. Anorexia is the highest mortality rate of any eating disorder. And you would think more people would be questioning the standard of care. Well, and there's not really a standard of care, but more people would be saying like, hey, wow, what we're doing is not working well. Imagine I've talked to several doctors, like imagine you were doing a surgery. And before the surgery, the patient signing off on the waiver, you're going to say, hey, there's a 50% chance you're going to die. This isn't going to work. All right, you ready to go? You'd be like, well, hey, all right, maybe I'll go see another surgeon. But that's what we do with anorexia. There's a greater than 50% chance you're going to relapse. And they actually, in several studies, they define relapsing as qualifying for the DSM-5, like losing weight, having to go back to treatment. There's 100% chance, in my opinion, you're going to engage in behaviors. So there's something else going on. And so what you've seen, what I've seen, what we wrote about, Dr. Nick Norwitz and I in the case study we presented, is we believe that when you shift your metabolism, when you actually start utilizing ketones versus glucose, that you're actually shifting how the brain functions. And how I like to talk about this, to really break it down as simplistically as possible, is think about epilepsy. Babies have epilepsy, right? Like, they didn't do anything wrong. They just, they eat normal formula, or they take in any type of glucose and they'll have a seizure. Well, we put babies on a ketogenic diet that have epilepsy and they stop seizing. And so we recognize that there's something metabolically going on in the brain that is causing the seizures, that the glucose is exacerbating, causing the seizures. We feed them ketones, don't seize. Everyone is fine with that. Any physician who ever talked to about epilepsy and ketogenic diets will be like, oh yeah, sure, that's great. These people, they just restrict carbs, they're good, no problem. For eating disorders, and Dr. Chris Palmer is doing clinical trials right now with major depression, bipolar disorder. I mean, Georgia Eade has been doing this with Alzheimer's. We're hypothesizing that it's similar. There's something going on in the brain that is just not working well with glucose. We have lots of insulin receptors in our brain. We don't know. Nobody knows exactly the inner workings of all of that. We need more studies. But what we are hypothesizing is that when you utilize ketones, when you stop flooding your body with all this glucose, and I would also hypothesize as well, is now all of a sudden you're getting lots of those vitamins we discussed earlier, the B12, B6, folate, that are going to help your brain function properly, that the struggle becomes less. I'm not going to say it's ever perfect. I don't think I'll ever be quote unquote 100%, I think but how it is now compared to how it was when I was a high carbohydrate human being, oh my gosh, it's like night and day.
Yeah, so different. That's amazing. Excuse me. I'll sometimes talk about this on our podcast. Is like if you'd have gone back and told me that eating this way would be primarily beneficial for the brain, I wouldn't have said that would be the case. And it sure looks like the evidence is stronger and stronger. And it's cool that it's very strong in both directions. It's like eliminating the carbohydrates is good. And then also providing your body with the nutrients that you need is also good. Both things are fantastic. So how did the study that you guys published, how did this come about? How did this fall into your lap?
Yeah. So, Nick and I did a case presentation in the very beginning of 2022 at Low Carb USA in Boca. I had several individuals with severe anorexia because anorexia, some people could wrap their heads around bulimia or binge eating disorder. Like, okay, we can see blood sugar stabilization. We can see a low carb diet being beneficial, but it was still like, oh no, not for anorexia. But I had recovered, I had done so well. And I had seen in the community other people that were struggling with this. And my heart was like, I know this way of eating could help people. And I definitely want to reinforce this is not a calorie. I mean, this is, these are the women who were healing and men. We had one guy in this study, we're eating, 5,000 plus calories a day. But they were also able to do that because they were eating, butters and fat and so much, really high fat things. And yeah, so Nick actually approached me, Dr. Norwitz, and was like, I think we could write a case series about this. I think there's enough evidence just to present it, just to start to get it out there. It's not a clinical trial. We didn't do this double blind, whatever. We were basically presenting a case series that it was our goal that it would get some traction, people struggling, people potentially looking for an alternative way to treat their eating disorder could at least say, oh, wow, that's interesting. These people did this and it worked for them. And I've had really, really positive, I've had several, actually pretty sad amount of parents reach out to me for their young people with eating disorders and say like, hey, can you tell me more? Can you point me more, for more resources? So yeah. And it's, I really have to credit Dr. Norwitz for, he definitely knows more about the process of getting things approved. Because you think you put together a really well-written paper that it would be relatively easy to get it approved, but the powers that be want very specific things. But I was really honored that we got that published in the Journal of Insulin Resistance.
That's fantastic. If anybody is able to navigate those waters, it's definitely Dr. Norwitz.
Yes.
Such a young guy, but very ambitious and has already done tons of studies and research. Super, super smart guy. We were messaging back and forth about that study just the other day and how it was done. So can you explain what a case study is? And you did mention a randomized controlled trial. Can you explain kind of the differences between those?
Yeah. So, a case study is what we're doing is we're taking, basically we're taking what people have, we're following what people have told us, using their labs, using a lot of their feedback as well, patient feedback, like saying like, hey, I've done so much better. But of course, we're also using the data. And the case study requires, we have documented weights for these people from their hospitals or doctors. We have documented labs, but we're not doing, when things are controlled, it's either in like a laboratory setting where it's being highly monitored. If it's a double blind study, that means both, you're usually switching out variables and neither the participants or the scientists know which one is which. So there's no potential for like, oh, I kind of want it to be this one. So I'm going to, write that this is the way it goes. So, and then there's a really good study on binge eating disorder, a case study from Dr. Satish Shabani, where they did the same thing. We're following individuals, we're tracking their data. But it isn't, like I said, like it's not in a laboratory setting. And those also tend to be more, you're going to have more people come at you and be like, wow, this isn't blah, blah, blah. But they are very useful, and they're usually a springboard for more controlled studies.
Yeah, in my mind, it's similar to the study that Harvard did about carnivores. And really, they're just sending out a survey to a bunch of people that claim they're following a carnivore diet. But when you start getting numbers in the thousands where you're getting responses, and it's like 95% of people feel like their health is improved by eating more meat and less of the other things we're told to eat, like whole grains and fruits and vegetables, like there's something there. There's something you can be looking at. And as the years go on, the anecdotes pile up and pile up and pile up. And it definitely shows you that something's going on. All these people are not lying. Like one case study is one thing, but when it's 10 and then 100 and 1,000 and 10,000, like it's building evidence all the time. And I can't remember exactly who said this. I think it was Peter Bruckner who said N of one study. So, or essentially a study that's just you based on yourself. You're just trying something out. They don't matter unless you are the N. If it is, then that's the only study.
That's the only
matters.
study that matters.
Exactly.
It's true, and we don't see people with BMI below about 13. At least when I worked in the hospital, it was kind of like that person's going to die. Like it was almost a sure thing. You would just look at it and be like, "Up." And people in our study, and myself, BMI under 11, like that's just people don't come back from that. And to see. And once again, it wasn't like we just made these numbers up. Like the study would not accept them until their hospital or their healthcare institution like checks them over. These are approved. This is actually what happened. So to show this like huge healing, this huge transformation, and after years of suffering and trying other things and struggling, I mean, to me, like you said, that's really powerful. And to me, it offers such a message of hope. People struggling with eating disorder, nobody wants to be obese, nobody wants to be astronomically underweight. So yeah, I was really grateful to get that put out there.
That's amazing. Well, you guys do such great work, like I said, and it's cool to see, some of the content in the studies. Like, were there metrics you were really looking at besides just BMI, or was it more like the personal stories of each of them?
Yeah, I like the fact that case studies let you use even quotes from the patient. They'll tell you their stories, so for us, not only tracking weights and BMIs, but even just like other metrics, some of their electrolytes, some things they always had issues with that normalized. But for me, hearing how their life had changed, like mentally, like, hey, I used to hate myself, want to die, like dealing with suicidal ideation or cutting. And now I look forward to every day. Like that's no small thing, and the same thing with, Dr. Satish Shabani with the binge eating disorder. Every single person had statistically significant improvements in mood. It's like, that's huge. That's huge. And if a pill did that, it would be on, the news for billions of dollars. But a way of eating that does that, it just gets kind of poo-pooed by people.
Wow. Well, that's awesome. What are the next steps? Like, what are the next studies that need to be done to continue pushing down this route?
I think what Dr. Palmer is doing right now is probably the next best step. So what he is doing is very specific, controlled ketogenic diets, using brain scans, measuring brain activity and brain function for people with diagnosed with severe bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and like major depression that's not responding well to medication. And so, those people, you see the before and the after being put on controlled ketogenic diets and controlled, living basically in a hospital, and showing that their brains are shifting and they're getting better. I mean, it's going to be pretty hard to argue with. And obviously, yeah. My goal, Nick's goal, Chris, Dr. Palmer's goal, our goal isn't that every human follows a ketogenic diet. Our goal is that doctors present this as, hey, this is an option that's worked really well. How about we do this before we try a bunch of different medications? How about we try this because it's incredibly effective. It's, minimal negative side effects. So we really just want this to be presented as an option.
Yeah, I think everybody in the space is just looking for that. They're just wanting to be part of the conversation and allow and enable doctors to talk about it if they like, to at least be presented. So exactly. I love that work. It's so awesome. It was great to interview her. Again, it was a tough interview to do and made me very uncomfortable. I was very squirmy. But it was cool to hear her personal story and understand that she was wrapped up with you guys. It's super cool. And now we've got some books to talk about. So let's talk about your first book, Dietitian's Dilemma. It's one of my favorites. I absolutely love it. I wanted to ask you the question, what is one thing in your book that you don't feel gets talked about enough, looked at enough, something you wish you could talk about more?
Oh man, that's a great question. I'm kind of dealing with personally in my work right now is I think we really have to start addressing sugar and processed foods as potentially addictive foods for a large majority of the population. I think we have to start addressing them as something that is contributing to exacerbating a lot of chronic diseases, including eating disorders. So I would really like to have more conversation or have more people, if you're dealing with major depression, certainly if you're dealing with, most people say, hey, you're obese, you're diabetic. I understand we should reduce sugar and flour, but even having, an eating disorder or major depression or heart disease, I hate when I talk about heart disease at work, people are like, oh, low salt. Like, no, salt is not the problem. So yeah, I would definitely like to continue the conversation around processed foods being a really strong driver for metabolic disease.
I mean, I'm sure when you wrote the book, that was in your field of consciousness, but it seems like even in just the last few years since you've written the book, that evidence has gotten so much stronger, even than when it was when you wrote the book. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. No, we're seeing, actually, I saw a study that I think it's up to 14% of people are addicted to ultra processed foods. And I'm seeing more work like Joan Iflin, Dr. Jen Unwin, really, putting work out there. I'm actually going to be on a committee trying to get sugar and processed food addiction added to the DSM-5.
Cool.
Went to DC last year to try to get a low carb option to the guidelines. Like, we're working hard, and there is movement towards getting more of these things out there. But with that comes, I'm sure you're not surprised, but a very large resistance and a lot of, we'll call it propaganda from processed foods. So
Yeah, there's a lot of powers that be that like really don't want this to succeed. It's like Ken Berry every time he's on stage. Like, Weight Watchers knows about you, Jenny Craig knows about you, food companies know about you. They know there are people out there that are doing really well with lots of different things on low carbohydrate, and you scare the shit out of them. Like, for sure, these companies know what's up, and so they will fight back. As you're seeing that kind of pushback.
Oh, well, and also we're just seeing, and Nina Teichel has helped me identify this more specifically, but more governing boards have more and more processed food sponsors. Like, we're trying to get a low carb option added to the nutrition guidelines for 2030. That board has several members that are affiliated with Coca-Cola. So guess how excited they are to do that? Like, they keep coming back with, you wouldn't believe some of the nonsense they wrote back about our, published studies and things we've submitted. So yes, the pharmaceutical industry as well as the processed food industry is a lot of money, very powerful, and they know they don't want to lose money. So people, eating real food, which it sounds wild. So we live in such a weird time. We're eating, meat and fat and vegetables is considered eating disordered. But yeah, the powers that be are not super excited about that.
Yeah, you think about the religious influence as well on things like plant-based diet. The new documentary Live to 100 came out on Netflix, which talks about the blue zones, and all these people are so healthy and they live a long time and everything. And then they use that to promote a plant-based diet. We've been going after that documentary really hard lately, and we just had Dr. Bill Schindler on, and he was like, "Dude, I was just in Sardinia. I ate more meat than I ate when I was at home. Like, they don't live on minestrone soup over there the way they portray it in this documentary." And you start to realize who are the powers that be to make this kind of messaging so, I guess, productive for them. It's something that makes them
it's very and they have an agenda, and they're very good at it. So yeah, it's really sad, and it's sometimes you feel like you take 2 steps forward and get knocked 10 steps back, but we keep advocating.
Yep, got to keep trying. And so you are trying again with a second book. We talked about Dietitian's Dilemma. I love this. I've been so excited to talk about this. Tell us about your second book.
Yeah, so I told my wife, I said, I'm never writing a second book, because this one, I mean, I'm so proud of it, but it's, a few hundred pages, tons of information. I tried to make it easy to read and fun, but there's also a lot of clinical trials cited where I actually, I was going on a run, and the FDA had just announced that they had approved 2 medications for children with type 2 diabetes. So children 12 and under. And I was so mad. I was on my run, and I was like, I'm going to write a book about kids and type 2 diabetes. Like, oh, this is so annoying. And it's, and as I'm running, I'm just fuming, and I'm like, it's going to be great. It's going to be these kids that get diabetes. And I'm like, it's going to be boring. Nobody wants. And there's a woman in our town, her name is Sarah Fox. She's running for mayor. And I was like, Foxabetes. All right. And so, yeah, so the book, it's called The Fox Family Food Fight. And it's, it's short. It's a kid's book. It's beautifully illustrated. I'm so happy and excited how it came out. I had a woman reach out to me when I was going to DC and just said, hey, I want to support the low carb community. I would be happy to pay for your trip to DC, which was amazing. All the shit's so expensive. But this was the first trip I had taken that they actually had offered to pay for it. The company had. And so I was like, oh, I can't take your money. I'd like to, but I'm actually getting the flight. And when I got this idea, I reached back out to her and said, hey, I got an idea. Would you like to help me fund this? Because it's expensive to write a book. I wish, people think it's fun and glamorous, but whew, I mean, I had no idea how much an illustrator was going to be. That blew my mind. But anyway, I was so grateful. Ryan and Kristen Tidwell have completely funded the Fox Family Food Fight. So little Freddie Fox and his Fox family They live in the forest, lots of alliteration. They're happy, they're frolicking. But then this fox from the city comes in and he's like, hey, come work at my feel good foods factory in the city. And all the foxes are like, all right, that sounds fun. Except for Grandpa. Grandpa Frankie's like, I don't know about this. But anyway, they go to the city, they work in the feel good foods factory, and it's, they make all this, sugar processed food, and everyone loves it. They're so delicious. But little Freddy Fox, he gets type 2 foxidiabetes. He passes out at work and he has to go to the foxpital, and he sees the foxitician. So yeah, it's kind of his journey and his family's journey, figuring out like, wait a second, what's going on here with this processed food? And so it's how how he recovers from type 2 foxidiabetes, and how is this fox that, conned them into coming to the city, how is he staying so healthy if he's eating all this processed food? So it's fun. The goal, like kind of like a Pixar or Disney movie, it's like the goal is that kids watch or read it and they're like, yay, Freddy. And parents might read it and be like, holy crap, we should eat better, Very simple. It's something you can have on your coffee table that, I would hope anybody would kind of flip through. Yeah. And, I shared with you this morning as we're recording this early November, I just got back at the finished formatted document. So hopefully it'll be up on Amazon within about a week.
That's amazing. We will absolutely be sure to link that. I've seen some of the illustrations, and yeah, whatever you paid to get those illustrations done, it's worth every penny. At least for me, I didn't have to pay it. They're adorable. It's so adorable.
It ended up being really cute. It was my goal to just have it fun, really bright, colorful. And it was really fun to see kind of like your vision, I remember the first time I went to Starbucks and just like scribbling down ideas for what this book could be, to see it like come to life. So it's been a journey, and I really cannot shout out, Kristen, especially Kristen Tidwell. We've been emailing back and forth, and she's been looking at the copies, and it's really cool. It's really cool when the community comes together and we're going to produce something really cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. Do kids' books have audiobooks? I'm not even sure about that.
I don't know. There's no plan to do an Audible right now, but there will be a paperback and an ebook.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, if there is some kind of audio format or whatever, you definitely have to do the voiceover for that. You're already doing the nice Fox voices which I really love.
For sure. I could do all the Fox voices.
That's awesome. I love that. Well, okay. So before we got on, I asked you if you were still working at the same place that you were working on at last time we interviewed you. You kind of said that was like maybe 10 jobs ago. You always have a lot going on. But tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, and how are you using this kind of journey through your own, reversal of poor health to help get this message out. What are you going to do in the future?
Yeah. So, I continue to do some like nutrition consults. I do that privately. But as well, I got contacted several months ago from a long-term care facility. So a place where people who have chronic diseases actually live, but it's like a healthcare facility as well. Looking for a dietitian. And I tend to, a lot of those, I get things from Indeed often, but I got a personal email from the director saying, hey, we're looking for a dietitian part-time. We could really use some help. And I emailed back and said, this is my philosophy. And since this place is not corporate, it's actually family owned, they are a little bit less bound by some of the corporate rigmarole. But, I went ahead and went in and interviewed and said, like, look, I'd be happy to work with you guys or help you, but this is how I practice, talking about the low carb. I showed them the evidence. And especially, their patient population is 90% type 2 diabetes and post-bariatric surgery. And they were all for it. They're like, yeah, we need help. Things aren't going well. And so I was like, all right. So that's what I'm doing, is I'm working to help, people in that facility. It would certainly be my goal that people in that facility get well enough that they don't have to live in the facility, but it's going to be an uphill battle. I'm finding that if there is a place where people are highly addicted to sugar, it's severe obesity. And, we're talking the average weight of our patient probably starts at about 400 pounds. We have people 600 plus. So, so it's pretty intense. Like, it's not going to be, I wish I could just go in and be like, we're all going to do low carb. This is what we're doing. Because even if we can provide these patients, like the kitchen does, a high protein, high fat, low carb, they live there and they have rights. They can order Uber Eats or Amazon or whatever they want. So it's getting buy-in, it's doing education, and I'm newer. So right now too, I'm just building rapport. Like, hey, this is, and I'm also finding that I'm fighting some pretty serious sugar addiction. I saw a patient who is 56 years old, 5'2" and 420 pounds, and hasn't been out of her bed, without help. She can get in a wheelchair with like a Hoyer lift in like 8 years. So I told her, I said, hey, you know what? First thing we can do, this is going to change your life, is let's switch out soda for water. She's drinking almost a 2-liter of soda every day. And as I'm talking to her this, she had a 2-liter soda next to her. I put my hand on the soda and she looked over at me and she put her arm on my hand and she said, if you take my soda, I will break both of your arms.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, whoa. I didn't say that. I was just like, okay, so we're not ready for that change. But just to show you how powerful, she literally is bedbound and is so addicted to sugar that she wasn't joking. I mean, she looked me right in the eye and was like, I will kill you. And, I can't say something crafty like, well, you'd have to get out of bed first, but just realizing just how powerful these foods are. So, my first goal in that facility is we're going to get rid of juice. I won't even tell you what I think about the other dietitian that was there before me, but the fact that we have 28 people consuming 300 ounces of juice a week is,
oh my goodness,
that's a good place to start, right? Let's get rid of the sugary beverages and then let's cut down on carbohydrates throughout the day. But yeah, I have a whole 52-week plan, outlined. It's going to be slow, and all these patients are monitored very well by doctors and nurses. So we will have, blood sugar and other things tracked. We're not trying to make anyone, hypoglycemic. Oh my God, you take their juice, they're going to die. No, it'll be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's wild, but it's my, I guess it's my next thing.
Oh, good for you. I think that's amazing. Are you familiar with the work of Hal Kramer at Paradise for Parents in Arizona?
Brian, Dr. Linsky actually just connected me with him. So I am very hopeful that, God, I would love to have some of his stuff. So he has a facility in Arizona where his patients are eating a keto or carnivore diet, and they're just having incredible results. Our facility, and I believe his facility though, doesn't even let food come in that's not keto or not carnivore. Where unfortunately, we're not doing that. But yes, I'm loving the results. I've shared them with our director and administrator, and I think that's what's kind of motivating them. And I will say I'm happy that these people that I'm working with, like, they want change. They're willing to kind of say, okay, we want to see some change, but they also realize like, hey, we can't. It is a patient's right to say no, or I'm not going to do that, or to order Uber Eats. So we're just gonna, like I said, I've got a 52-week plan to wean off things and to change things. And yeah. And what if when I was talking with the care staff, I was like, what if we could just get everybody 10 or 15% better? People could move a little more. People had less infections. People had better mood. And of course, my head and my heart, I want people to be 100% better, but it's hard to get buy-in. Changing, like you said, even with everything, even with a coach or with whatever, change is hard. So
yeah, it's tough.
I was saying, ultimately it's never my goal to, I'm not a therapist. I can't change anybody. That's never like my ultimate goal. My ultimate goal is to provide every single tool possible and empower them to make the change.
Yeah. Well, I think just based on talking to him and his story, and, we interviewed one of his residents who lived there, who entered the facility at 550 pounds. At the time we interviewed her, she was at 380 pounds. And that was
Awesome.
only 6 months of being in the facility. She's gone. She's out of that facility now because she continued to improve her health to the point that she's living at a home that has way less assistance for her. She can do a lot more by herself. And the thing that seemed to happen inside the facility is, like, the more you got at least one or two people to buy in, they started getting better. The other residents are looking around like, what's up with these guys? Like, I want to do what he's doing. Like, we're going to be interviewing not only Hal sometime this week, but also one of the residents that left that came in with heavy dementia. And she's leaving basically with mild cognitive decline. And apparently she wants to be one of Maria Emmerich's health coaches now. I think she's like in her 80s. Like, so cool. So cool. So it can be done. So it's not going to be easy. I'm glad you have at least a 52-week plan. You're probably going to use every single week of that, but it can be done, and people are doing it. So I'm really hopeful that will be an amazing project for you.
Thank you. Me too.
That's awesome. Very cool. Well, this has been such a fun conversation. I always enjoy talking to you, Michelle Hurn. Where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Yeah, so I'm most active on Instagram at Run, Eat, Meet, Repeat. My website, thedietitiansdilemma.net. You can get The Dietitian's Dilemma on Amazon, and pretty soon, maybe by the time this comes out, the Fox Family Food Fight will be up on Amazon too.
That's so cool. You should be so proud of those books. That's amazing.
Thank you, yes.
Very, very cool. Well, Michelle Hurn, again, thank you for coming back on our show today. We know how busy you are, and just to come back and tell your story and all the different ways you're helping people, it's just really inspiring. And so thank you again for coming on our show today. We really appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.